Good morning. You're watching All You Need to Know on Bloomberg Quint Live, and I'm Alex Matthew. First, the headlines today. Asian markets are off to a mixed start despite equities on Wall Street staging a rebound. Trade tensions between US and China continue to linger. Jet Airways CEO Vinay Dubey has quit the grounded carrier last evening, citing personal reasons. The Reserve Bank of India has appointed former Deputy Governor R. Gandhi on the board of Yes Bank for a period of 2 years. Oil prices fell overnight after rising US inventories offset geopolitical tensions developing in the Middle East. And India has extended its deadline to impose retaliatory import tariffs on 29 US products to the 16th of June, as against the earlier deadline that ended on Thursday. Let's talk about the US markets now. US stocks rebounded from their biggest loss in over 4 months as trade tensions continue between the US and China. Now, despite Tuesday's jump, benchmark indices on Wall Street have lost close to 4% this month. Renita Young of Bloomberg News tells you everything that happened in yesterday's session on Wall Street.
U.S. markets are extending a rebound on Tuesday as the S&P 500 rises from the worst market rout in about 4 months, reclaiming more than half of Monday's losses. This is happening as investors bargain hunt from whatever carnage was left from Monday's market rout, and China and America appear to be committed to continuing trade talks as trade fears recede. Now, interestingly enough, the U.S. just prepped fresh tariffs on the remaining $300 billion of imports from China. Now, there were a couple of companies that were very highly exposed to trade, including Caterpillar and Boeing, which reversed about half of Monday's losses. Apple and Nvidia also bouncing back. And don't forget, we're still in the middle of corporate earnings season, with Ralph Lauren shares to the lowest intraday since January 24th. This was even though they had strong results, the company saw comparable sales that missed analyst estimates. And Ralph Lauren investors believe that the company will have trade tension worry. Their US-China trade tensions may impact Ralph Lauren, since the company sources about a quarter of its products from China. Now, we do have earnings continuing: Cisco Systems, Macy's, and Walmart coming on Thursday. Meanwhile, commodities are rising just as shares are bouncing back. They were targeted, a lot of the commodities, agricultural ones, are targeted by Chinese tariffs. Soybean and cotton futures are rising after falling on Monday. WTI crude is rising above $61 a barrel, and gold is falling. This is traditionally a safe haven in times of geopolitical uncertainty. No surprise there that gold is falling instead of rising, because the sentiment has changed around the U.S.-China trade tension story. The Bloomberg Dollar Index is gaining as the U.S. dollar is higher versus major currency competitors. And we do have U.S. data coming for U.S. retail sales and industrial production on Wednesday. That's the same day that retail sales and industrial production comes out for China. And that's a look at your Tuesday Wall Street action. In New York, I'm Renita Young for Bloomberg News.
All right, that's how the US markets look. Let's see if that positivity is carrying on to the Asian markets this morning. Let's go straight to Rosalind Chin, who's joining us from the Bloomberg studios in Hong Kong. That's a positive end to the US session, Rosalind. Is that some element of solace that's coming in for traders in Asia this morning?
I believe so, and in fact, since the markets opened here in Hong Kong and in Shanghai, in China, we have seen the markets, broadly speaking, tick upwards here in Asia. Before that, they were kind of a little bit lackluster, looking for direction. So right now, we're seeing the MSCI Asia Pacific Index making gains of just under 1/5%. Earlier, in fact, only about 15 minutes ago, really, it had actually been flat, or in fact in negative territory. Now, what we have seen, of course, is generally, sentiment is still fragile. Trade is still a big issue, as we all know, and it's difficult to know where that is going to be heading. Many analysts that we're speaking to are, of course, looking ahead to Osaka, which is where the G20 leaders meeting is going to be happening at the end of June, for some progress perhaps to be made at those talks when Xi and Trump are both there at the same time. So we've also had Gina Martin-Adams. She's a Bloomberg Intelligence chief equity strategist, chief equity analyst, also saying that really we're looking ahead to about a month or more of volatility on the markets before we get to those talks in Osaka. So we look around the region now. We've got the Nikkei, that's actually losing just over 1/10%. The Topic's also down by about 1/10% as well. Elsewhere, though, trading higher. The Kospi is up by 0.6%. Hang Seng, which just opened a few moments ago, up by 0.45%. And Shanghai Composite up by more than 0.75% at this moment in time. CSI also up by about 1% as well. Now, I want to take a quick look at Japan, though, because one stock there really is taking quite a hit today, and that is Nissan. It had results out, and in fact, it's fallen by the most since 2012, and that's largely on two issues. One is a lower dividend. The second is its forecast for annual operating profit coming in actually below even the most pessimistic analysts' forecasts and estimates at $2.1 billion for the year ending March 2020, which is about half or less than the average projections for that. Right now, Nissan Motor is down more than 6%, 6.3% at this point in the session. Elsewhere, though, if we look around at Australia, that market is trading higher by about 1/3. Of course, we've had some words coming out from President Trump, which is helping to buoy sentiment a little bit there. Trump saying that the US has a dialogue ongoing with China, and also saying, I think it's going to turn out extremely well. So the power of his words really able to move the markets quite significantly on any day, as we have seen, and we are seeing again today. So looking ahead, we've got a bit of data coming out very soon. Retail sales from China and industrial production. The same data also coming out in the US later in the day, and looking ahead also to Tencent and Alibaba results also coming out. So plenty for investors to digest today. Back to you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for that, Rosalind. Well, let's talk a little bit more about what Rosalind was saying with regard to President Donald Trump. In fact, he looked to reassure investors, saying that a deal with China is still on the cards. He termed the trade tussle with China as a minor squabble, though. Let's listen into what he had to say.
We are, again, in a very, very strong position. They want to make a deal. It could absolutely happen. But in the meantime, a lot of money is being made by the United States, and a lot of strength is being shown. This has never happened to China before. Our economy is fantastic. Theirs is not so good.
Now, there seems to be a bit of a conflicting statement coming in from President Donald Trump and some of his advisors. Joe Sobzik of Bloomberg News tells you what all of that is about.
This is another continuation of his criticism of the Fed. He has previously urged them to cut interest rates and accelerate bond purchases. Now he is tying that to the trade conflict with China and suggesting that China's central bank would make similar moves in order to boost its economy. And so he wants the Fed to take action, even though the U.S. economy, as he said, is quite strong. This is it's a rather unusual position for the president to be in, to want the Fed to help them in this trade war, and to insist that even though the economy is doing solidly with unemployment at a 49-year low, that the U.S. needs still more stimulus to continue on.
Joe, if the U.S. were to go down that path, what would some of the implications be for its relations with other countries?
Well, one of the big things is that the U.S. has long insisted that, or long complained of other countries trying to influence their central banks for political purposes. And if the Fed were to make some moves that could drive down the cost or the value of the dollar, which would certainly draw complaints about currency manipulation from other countries, again, something that the U.S. has long complained about in its relationships with trading partners, currency manipulation. So it might create a bit of a tangle for the U.S. as it tries to resolve other trade issues and go through with diplomacy with other nations as if the Fed were to follow his lead.
All right, let's talk about the other big talking point, which is oil. And oil prices have inched higher early on Tuesday after two pump stations on the east-west pipeline in Saudi Arabia were attacked by armed drones. However, it surrendered its gains and fell from that point after the American Petroleum Institute reported that oil inventories in the U.S. may rise as much as 8.6 million barrels. Sharon Cho of Bloomberg News brings you this report.
Oil prices are falling about 1% today. I think the industry data that shows that U.S. inventories will rise by 8 million barrels is kind of playing into it, as well as the trade tensions that's happening between the U.S. and China. But I think it's important to watch the geopolitical tensions in the Middle East because the Saudi's biggest oil pipeline has been shut down, and they have been their tankers, vessels have been attacked in the recent days. And it turns out that Yemeni rebels actually claimed responsibility that they're behind this attack, and they are backed by the Iranians, by Iran. So I think it's a big development that's in progress right now.
Yeah, geopolitics aside, what other significant events do we need to keep an eye on for the oil markets?
For the oil markets, we have the OPEC. We have the meeting between OPEC key members and Saudi Arabia happening in Jeddah this week. So they will be assessing the oil market and publishing a report later this week. So that's one thing to watch out on. I don't think it's going to generate any kind of conclusion on what OPEC plus coalition is going to do with their output cuts, because they have a ministerial meeting in late June. But that's one thing to watch out on. And the trade tensions is still happening. That's a key factor to keep an eye on, because we have the U.S. Treasury Secretary saying that he wants to visit China for a meeting on trade talks. And we have the two presidents meeting at the G20 meeting later in June. So those are key events to keep a close eye on.
So Sharon, when it comes to supply and the OPEC plus supply cuts, how has compliance looked so far?
Mm-hmm. Compliance has fallen a little bit according to the recent reports. And we have U.S. President Trump pressing China and asking them to increase production. So, and we noticed that supply globally has been really short, and we have seen a lot of unplanned and planned outages. So supply is already a bit short. OPEC compliance is not so as much as some of us have expected. But right now, supply seems to be an issue that investors and analysts will closely keep an eye on.
Well, absolutely. In fact, one more development in that respect is that President Donald Trump has denied a New York Times report that said that he would be sending 120,000 troops to the Middle East if war does break out with Iran. But we'll keep a close eye on that, and of course geopolitics that lead to changes in oil prices. Meanwhile, let's turn to the Indian market. Agam Vakil is here to tell you all about the day's trade and what's happening in the futures and options space. Agam, it might be a little bit of a hazard to guess this early how things go, considering yesterday's session. Volatility is the name of the game.
It absolutely is, and unlike what a lot of people were expecting, we actually saw gains on the markets yesterday, snapping a 10-day, or rather 9-day losing streak. But today, again, there's an indication of the SGX Nifty declining. But you can't really go by this, considering this decline is just of 18 points. And yesterday's market, we did see some gains coming through, so some relief for those investors who are long, but not as much. And the mid-cap and the small-cap indices moving in tandem with benchmarks, so with gains in the banking indices. As far as your ADRs are concerned, for now, we're looking at Vedanta, Tata Motors, ICICI Bank all advancing in trade. Among others, some marginal weakness perhaps for Wipro. As far as your FIIs are concerned, well, another 2,000 crores worth of stocks sold. On the other hand, DI is coming to rescue, so we've seen that come through. And Reliance Industries, ITC, L&T and SPI among stocks which are actually propping up the indices and giving us some support. But as far as your futures and options space is concerned, are we looking at short covering? We are, considering a 4.5% decline in open interest, even as the stock, or rather the underlying advances. and it's the same. Is it the same for the Bank Nifty futures? Yes, it is. 3% decline there as well. As far as your open interest distribution is concerned, we're looking at a 500-point range between 11,000 and 11,500. And in terms of changes in open interest, we're keeping an eye on, well, largely 11,200 and 300 calls and puts both. Did see some amount of activity there. As far as your VIX is concerned, that really hasn't eased, and it is unlikely to ease as we move in to the election results next week, and it's still at 27%, and we did see a little bit of a rise in the put call ratio at around 1.28. As far as stocks go, we're keeping an eye on Muthoot Finance, MRPL, and Tata Steel. Also, Jubilant FoodWorks will announce its earnings today. We saw a decline, some shorts coming through. And in unwinding, we're keeping an eye on stocks like ICICI Prudential, CIET, and Oriental Bank of Commerce. So, among many others, some unwinding coming through there as well. Again, mixed day of trade, Alex, and we continue to keep an eye on the index.
Thanks so much for that, Agam. Well, let's look at what's making headlines across the globe. Sue Keenan of Bloomberg News brings you the first word headlines.
We start with President Trump, who has defended his China strategy, saying it's merely a squabble. He insisted the U.S. has been treated unfairly for decades, but that the trade war is likely to turn out, quote, extremely well. Wall Street recovered as investors digested the more positive comments. The S&P 500 rose for the second time in 3 sessions, although it's still down 4% since the tariff spat escalated last week.
The relationship I have with President Xi is extraordinary. It's really very good, but he's for China and I'm for the USA, and it's very simple. We are, again, in a very, very strong position. If they want to make a deal, it could absolutely happen.
Moving on to Saudi Arabia now, the country briefly shut its biggest oil pipeline after drones attacked 2 pumping stations, and a rebel group in Yemen claimed they did it. Now, meanwhile, the U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia says separate Saudi claims of attacks on oil tankers should be investigated, but need, quote, reasonable responses short of war. No one has claimed responsibility, and Iran dismissed the claims as a plot to stoke further unrest. To the latest on Brexit now, UK Prime Minister Theresa May is aiming to put a key piece of Brexit legislation to Parliament in the first week of June. This after the cabinet ruled it imperative that the main bill be passed before MPs leave Westminster for the summer. The Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn says he won't support May's deal without concessions, and he doubts the credibility of the promises the government has offered thus far. Self-proclaimed Venezuelan leader Juan Guaido, meanwhile, says the country is falling apart and that the government continues to try to silence the opposition. He also says there are many ways of resolving the crisis and that he's been in contact with the U.S. military. However, sources tell us Washington is unlikely to agree to Guaido's request for an executive order protecting Venezuela's assets from creditors. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and at TikTok, on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Sue Keenan, and this is Bloomberg.
We have with us Mr. Jatin Singh. He's the MD of SkyMet Weather Services. Thank you for joining us, sir. So what's your prediction of the onset of monsoon for 2019?
We've gone for about 4th of June. Is when we think the monsoon is going to strike, around the date, plus minus 2 days, strike Kerala.
Okay. And how have you arrived to this prediction?
We have had a dynamical model and statistical analysis, and we've done an averaging, and we've come to an estimate of 4th of June.
Okay. Could you also tell us the region-wise precipitation forecast that you have mentioned?
Yes, we think that Northwest India is going to be 96%, Central India is going to be 91%, Northeast and East India should be 92%, and South India should be 95%.
Okay. And the IMD had predicted that it will be a near normal monsoon, whereas you're saying that it will be below normal. So how is there a mismatch?
Ask the IMD. That is our estimate. You can ask the IMD about their methods, but we are very heavily El Nino centric, and as long as there's a threat of El Nino and we think that the El Nino is going to sustain itself, we think that monsoon will be weak.
Okay. So what is the impact of El Nino? You're seeing that
80% chance of all El Nino years are below normal, 60% of drought, 0% chance of excess. If there is an El Nino in the monsoon script in India during the June months of July, August, September, I in my working life have not seen any deviation that says there's going to be great monsoon. I haven't seen a single exception to that. There probably is only one exception, which is 1997.
There are a number of stocks we will be looking at today, starting with the important earnings. Nestle India came in with their first quarter calendar year 9 results, which were in line with estimates. Their revenues were up 9% at 3,003 crore rupees, and margins stand at 24.6% versus 25.3%. Then Pidilite Industries, the numbers were a miss. Their revenues are up 10% at 163 crores, and net profit is down 3.7% at 235 crores due to an exceptional loss of 11 crores in the current quarter. Then we have Endurance Technologies, which came in with a good set of numbers. Their revenues are up 9.5% at 1,900 crore rupees, and margins are at 17.1% compared to 15%. IIFL Holdings also came in with an inline set of numbers. The revenues are down 17% at 1,412 crores. The net profit is up 20% due to an exceptional gain, lower tax and higher other income. NTPC wins 100 megawatt of solar capacities in SECI's 250 megawatt tender in Maharashtra at a levelized tariff of rupees 2.91 per unit, applicable for 25 years. Tata Sons is set to transfer all its branded food businesses to Tata Global Beverages from Tata Chemicals, as per Bloomberg News, as India's biggest conglomerate streamlines its corporate structure. Then we have Yes Bank. RBI appoints ex-Deputy Governor R. Gandhi as additional Director of Board till May 2021. And lastly, we have DHFL. ICRA downgraded commercial papers worth 850 crore rupees to A4 from A3 plus due to deterioration in the company's liquidity profile.
All right, lots of content just like that on the website bloombergquint.com. Of course, you'll find all the live market action and in fact all the coverage on politics. Things are heating up now with the results just about a week away. So do stay tuned to Bloomberg Quint and find all the analysis and the opinions right there. Let me tell you about one story that's interesting. Yesterday, in case you're watching the technology space, Chinese phone maker OnePlus seemingly looking to stir up things in the hotly contested smartphone market here in India. It launched its OnePlus 7 and the OnePlus 7 Pro with what many perceive to be very aggressive pricing. The OnePlus 7s have been priced at an introductory price of 33,000 and 38,000, while the OnePlus 7 Pro will be available in 3 variants, priced between 49,000 and 58,000. All right, well, the OnePlus Pro has 3 cameras at the back. I don't know how you're going to use that. I'll find out. Meanwhile, that's all we have for you in this edition of All You Need to Know. Do stay tuned, though. There's a lot more coming up on Bloomberg Quint.